Well, thank you all very much for allowing me to be with you again to share some thoughts with you. Just to make sure that we're on the same track. When Joan asked me to do this, and specifically to talk about HB1, she asked that I not get into the details of the evidence-based model and the funding reforms that we introduced, and I really appreciated that because early in the email she said you're going to have about 45 minutes for the presentation, and I can tell you after giving that sort of full-blown presentation, it cannot be done in 45 minutes. I've spent 2 hours giving that presentation to people, so when you really go into the details of all the reforms that we propose, it really takes a lot of time. But so for today, Joan really asked me to kind of talk about the history behind the school funding debate here in the state of Ohio, and then also to talk about the philosophy and the sort of guiding principles, if you will, that are at the foundation of the education reforms that we enacted with HB1. And then I'd like to provide a sort of summary of some of what I think are some of the key education reforms and also school funding reforms that were in HB1. You should have 2 documents. The first is a copy of the overheads, which is kind of in landscape format. And then, because I know there's always people interested in some of the details when they come to presentations like this, the portrait document actually provides you all of the key elements of the evidence-based model, and sort of gives you a breakdown of how those different components of the model are categorized in the funding model itself. This is a document prepared by the Ohio Department of Education. If you go onto their website, you'll find this and really much more on the funding model itself that will give you a better understanding of it if you so desire. So jumping right into this, because again 45 minutes will be gone before we know it. And the thinking is 45 minutes of presentation and then 15 minutes of question and answers. If you want to ask me a question in the middle of the presentation, please feel free to do so. I will watch my watch, and if I get to the point where I still have a lot left to go, then I'll just politely say, can we hold off until the end for questions. But let's start out by allowing you to ask questions if you do have questions. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the history. I'm pretty sure all of you know this history. This slide really gives you sort of a chronology of the Duroff case that started in 1991. But I think what's more important to really notice in this chronology, and I really don't have all of it because even after 2002, there were 2 additional key points in that chronology, and that was the Ohio Coalition for Equity and Adequacy submitted a writ of certiorari, a petition of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, asking them to review the Ohio Supreme Court's final decision, the Duroff decision. If you recall, in the final decision, they basically said that the system is still unconstitutional, that the law that was expressed in decisions 1 and 2 are the law of the case for the school funding issue, and that and this was a key thing, they released their jurisdiction of the case, meaning that they were done with it. They weren't going to decide any more issues related to the Duroff case. And so the E&A Coalition basically said, well, how can you do that? I mean, you say it's unconstitutional, you say it must be fixed, but then you're releasing jurisdiction. And they appealed that to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied their petition to review the case, and they denied it without an opinion on why they denied it. So that literally ended the Duroff case when the Supreme Court, and that was in 2003. But in essence, I put this slide in to just give you a sense of that the Duroff case was really a 12-year process of litigation. And during that 12 years, there was some really tense moments that occurred. But even after that 12 years of actual litigation in the DeRoff case, there were 6 more years of political bantering about the DeRoff case and about what should be done with education funding in the state of Ohio. Which gets us to the present moment in 2009 when House Bill 1 passed the General Assembly and the governor signed it into law. When you look at the DeRoff case, in the first decision, the Supreme Court ruled the system was unconstitutional, and they ruled it unconstitutional for these 4 reasons. Operation of the school foundation program was inadequate. It was inadequate because the state had engaged in residual budgeting. The state had a cost of doing business factor that had no relationship to what the actual cost of of educating our students cost the state of Ohio. That the categorical funds that have been used by the state were unadjusted for wealth differences. So in essence, children in poor districts and children in rich districts were basically being treated the same by the categorical funds. And then guarantees, that we had exercise guarantees, and that these guarantees more or less benefited the wealthy more so than the poor school districts. Over-reliance on property taxes, local property taxes, and this over-reliance was created by reappraisal phantom revenue, charge-off phantom revenue, and ballot fatigue because of districts having to go back to the ballot so frequently because of the 2 phantom revenues. How many are familiar with phantom revenue? Okay. Phantom revenue is a concept that was developed, I believe, by Howard Fleeter and Levin and Driscoll, who are kind of the education finance experts in the state of Ohio, back when the DeRoff case was just beginning. And it was a concept to describe how the state was assuming that school districts had money from local property taxes when they actually did not have that money coming into their systems. That's the quick and dirty definition. It's a lot more technical than that, but again, I don't think I have the time to go into a little bit better description for you.
Well, and then on the basis of that assumption of phantom revenue, you got less
from the state.
From the state.
Yes.
So you got a double whammy.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's exactly right. And that's why it was so detrimental as a system, because the state was not making that contribution for dollars that they weren't getting out of the system. School district borrowing was a practice in the state of Ohio for many, many years prior to the DeRoff decisions. And this is where school districts actually borrowed money from the state. The state then charged them interest, and the districts had to pay the state back, if you can believe that. And that happened for years. But thank God it did end after the DeRoff decisions. And then last but not least, that there were insufficient funding for facilities. Some of you may remember the documentary that was done by Jim Moyer on PBS that I think really brought that issue to the forefront, and also the government accountability, or back then it was called the Government Accounting Office, issued a study of school facilities across the country, and Ohio was dead last in that study back in the mid-90s. And so, you know, those are the reasons, the main reasons why the court ruled it was the system was unconstitutional. And then basically the court concluded that the school funding system as a whole must undergo a systemic overhaul. Then, you know, and so, you know, after the DeRoff decision was handed down in 1997, in March of 1997, the General Assembly and the governor at that time really just rejected the court's opinion at that point in time. And but the court, in making its decision, basically gave the General Assembly and the governor, gave the state a year to try and fix the deficiencies that they identified in their decision. And so once the General Assembly passed a whole slew of laws, mainly Senate Bill 55 and House Bill 412, which, you know, created our report card system that we have now, created the charter school program that we have now, created a number of different sort of accountability measures that was the state's solution to the DeRoff decision at that point in time.